Hello, I'm Josephine Burton, and welcome back to the Dash Arts podcast, seeing the world through an artistic lens. At the end of 2021, we actually created and made a production, Songs for Babyn Yar. It was emotional and challenging and hugely rewarding. Songs for Babyn Yar commemorates the horrific massacre of more than 30,000 Jews in 1941, and then a further possibly 100,000 murdered lives through the course of the Nazi occupation at Babyn Yar, a ravine on the outskirts of Kyiv in Ukraine, through beautiful, soul-touching music, personal testimony, storytelling, film, and poetry. Thanks to our amazing international partners and performers and creative team, as its director, I miraculously managed to make it in Germany and London, and we performed it in Berlin, London, and Kyiv in the autumn. Rachel, Dash's fabulous podcast producer, also moonlighted as our stage manager in Ukraine. She recently reunited us, sadly digitally, to relive the experience. So, Rachel, how was it for you?
Well, firstly, thank you for having me. I was thrilled to be able to come, honestly. But for me, it was a very different experience to anything I've produced or stage managed before. It was so raw, so real, and you never forgot where you were standing. It was also such a pleasure just to see how invested everyone was, because I know from experience that is not always the case. And that was from all sides. So like creatives, artists, and the Ukrainian and German cultural institutes. I'm really, really glad that we were able to catch up with Mariana, Sveta and Yuriy and get their reflections on the show, because we've all been so busy afterwards, and then it was the holiday season and it's taken a little while, but I'm really pleased that we were able to do it. And without further ado. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me again. Post-Ukrainian show to talk about Songs for Babyn Yar. I was there. It was an incredible show with an incredible reception and so well served. It was the most moving thing I've ever seen, and certainly the most moving thing I've ever worked on. How was it for you? What were you sort of expecting the reception to be, and was it different?
Well, I don't think it was our second show, right? The one before was in London, and it felt differently, although both were very, very special and very emotional. Still in Kyiv, where it all actually happened, it resonated differently with the audience and with us. The feedback was different, and I think I won't exaggerate if I say all of us were overwhelmed.
Yeah, definitely not. Josephine?
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with Yuriy. I think there was a lot of nerves and expectations the first time round, with teching and dressing and doing it all in one day, and there was so much adrenaline running around, just trying to get it kind of off. And then I think we didn't have a second show, so we just did this one show, which we saw its potential. We knew it worked, and we knew it was going to be amazing. And then we got to really, I think, the second time round and doing it in Ukraine, we got to be in the show, and actually kind of felt more intense. We were properly performing, and the audience were phenomenal. The response was amazing.
I had a feeling that if I remember, what was for me to perform in Kyiv and what was difference of performing in London or a small part in Berlin, it felt in Kyiv that with this piece, with everything we are talking about, we are doing about, and the subject itself, in Kyiv, it felt like to touch the naked nerves. When in London, there was kind of distance somehow, maybe because for the audience, or for most of the audience, the subject of Babyn Yar is somewhere in the past, somewhere far away. And in Kyiv, it felt so near and so urgent and so painful, like for us and for audience, but also so important. And what we heard a lot after, in the way, kind of healing. It's like, it's like to make pain, but for to reveal the pain, like healing.
Yes, cathartic.
I was very moved. It was very interesting to read the feedbacks on Facebook that people wrote who attended our show. And many of them sent friends requests. I only guessed by their names that they are Ukrainian from Kyiv or from other parts from Ukraine, and I guessed that they were at the show. And then I had the possibility of reading their words. Almost all of them were talking about this very strong connection in the audience they experienced, not just the artist on stage and the people in the audience were all united and were all connected. It felt like a communal experience, like not individual experience, but rather as a community. And I think that this is something which we felt on stage. And for me personally, it would helped me to get through, because I've never done a show in my life which would be so emotional, where I have to really dive deep into what we are talking or singing about, and at the same time be very conscious and careful about my own emotions on stage. And sometimes we have the moments when Mariana or Yuriy hold me there. They hold me there with their eyes. Our eyes locked, and like, I'm holding you, I'm holding you. And I felt this from the audience. I felt that this was all united. It's like we held each other and we were talking with each other about something, the hardest thing in the world, and we were helping each other to get through it emotionally, I think.
I think that's a beautiful thing to say, Sveta. And it reminds me of the conversations that we had in the rehearsal room. I mean, almost the very first conversation really was talking about how do we support each other? How do we look after each other as we touch this material? And that conversation that we had, I think, was one of the first. You know, first day, first rehearsal, almost over a year ago, and we kept coming back to that conversation. I remember a very emotional conversation that we all had and I wonder if that connects to what you just said, Mariana, about the distance that happened in London, because there's something about that distance which maybe shielded you all as artists a little bit. And as you said, Mariana, the proximity to the actual site, it came alive so much more. And I to hear you say, Sveta, that you felt like you were being held is very brilliant, because I'm not sure that we fully acknowledged that could happen when we had that first conversation. We were thinking about us as a unit. We weren't really thinking about the potential of the audience to support us. And it completely felt like that at the end, that conversation, the Q&A, which went on for longer than our show. It was like a group therapy session. Felt to me like a group therapy session. Just every single person wanted to share something.
I was going to ask about the Q&A, actually, because it, as you say, it went on for such a long time, and I was listening in the back and felt like there were some real stories being shared and some real characters that wanted to talk. Do you guys remember any stories in particular from people?
I remember Svetlana talking about the place of Babyn Yar and how they weren't allowed to grieve there or to come there to remember.
It's probably worth me adding for Svetlana, Petrovska is an educator and a historian, and she was born in 1934, and she told us the story about how she had left Kyiv with her parents, but her grandparents and her aunts had not left. So she returned after the war. She told us a story about how she went annually every year to the Yar, even when you weren't allowed to, when they weren't even marking it yet as a memorial and a grave. And they, as Svetlana said, they were moved on. And she used to bring roses. I think she said she used to bring roses there every year, and they moved them on. And her grandparents died there, and her family to be in this environment where she felt able to share that story, and we were having an encounter with somebody who had a personal relationship with the space was amazing.
Yeah, I think it's also maybe important to say that it was only one performance in Kyiv, in huge town, in capital of Ukraine, and actually for such a big capital, for very little people who could attend it. And most of the people were invited by us, by Goethe Institute, by the Ukrainian Institute. So it was a very special audience. I felt it was like, Ukrainian intellectuals, Ukrainian writers, philosophers, activists, like the best, basically, and very kind of family, dear one, it was dear people who came. So it was, in the way, very beautiful, and I felt a lot of warmth and a lot of openness. Like, it's like family. On the other hand, for example, for me, it was very important to invite Svetlana Petrovskaya. I was really hoping she would come because she's 86, and because, for me, it was like presence of Rahil in our performance and presence of Svetlana Petrovskaya in the audience in our performance. It was like biggest gift and biggest blessing, and also biggest responsibility, what we do and how they would respond to it.
She was so moved, wasn't she? She just couldn't. I mean, when I spoke to her briefly, I think she thought that actually that you were me, Svetlana. She got us confused, and I was honoured to receive the congratulations from the performance on your behalf. But she couldn't, she just wanted to talk, and then she stood and she spoke, and then she started to recite poetry. It was just phenomenal.
It was Ilya Ehrenburg who worked there in 1944, I believe. So this is one of the earliest poems written on the subject, I believe. And it was very moving and touching and slightly surreal, because nowadays I don't think people recite poetry just like that, This was magic.
It was magic, and the tone changed and everything. And presumably she stepped from Ukrainian into Russian, or did she say the whole thing in Russian?
No, she was moving Ukraine into Russian.
You're right.
That's my read of it. But I have to acknowledge in front of my extraordinary multilingual, brilliant friends that my languages are still shocking, and my Russian and Ukrainian are terrible. But for me, actually, the big difference for me to experience the performance was to experience the texts that Mariana and Yuriy and Sveta were saying in Ukrainian rather than in English. And it was a big change for the show, because in English, in the UK, there was a lot of English spoken. And it was obviously for me as a non-Ukrainian speaker, largely, it transported the work. It became something entirely different and more, I would say probably more honest in some ways. How did it feel for you guys to be doing it in Ukrainian?
Challenging, but it felt right.
But it's not your first language, or your second, or your third language, Ukrainian, right?
Well, it's my second language, which I didn't practice for so many years, because my family left Ukraine when I was 13, and since then I basically never spoke it. So it was the first time singing in Ukrainian and speaking Ukrainian from stage. Felt very special. It was a very vulnerable place for me also, because I didn't feel secure with my words, but it felt like this is the right move, this is the right decision, this should be the language we, all three of us, speak on stage. So I'm very glad that despite all the mistakes, whatever, I did it in Ukrainian. It felt good.
We had a lot of feedback, but there was no feedback about your mistakes in Ukraine.
I compensated it with other things. I hope.
Yeah.
I loved it, Sveta, and I loved that you tried. But I also, I think my favorite experience really was watching you doing it together as a three, and Mariana kind of coaching you through the Ukrainian. It matched so nicely, Yuriy, with your text towards the end when you talk about learning Ukrainian, about moving from, like relearning or, converting a Russian to Ukrainian, the kind of combination of your own journey and then experiencing Sveta live was very special.
I can totally relate to what Sveta's saying, because although I've been practicing Ukrainian recently in the last 3 or 4 years, I believe it was the first time that I was speaking at length in Ukrainian from a stage in Kyiv, and this felt very, very exciting, also very challenging and very rewarding, because it felt like, in a way, some circle was closing. And it did help that we actually knew exactly what we wanted to say, because we did that already 2 weeks before that in London. And it wasn't an exact translation. I think we changed some bits slightly when putting them like, I would not say translate, but when saying it in Ukrainian, yes, because we knew we're facing a different audience, obviously. I think it was more in London, it was more, for the lack of other better word, I think it was more of an educational show in a way. So we knew we're telling something, well, in a way, more than it was in Kyiv for me, because I knew that part of the audience probably doesn't know what we know. And in Kyiv, it was different.
You know, it's interesting you say that, Yuriy, because I can understand that, and we did get asked that question, didn't we? Like when we were in Kyiv, one of the other questions to us was, does anyone even know about Babyn Yar in London? But actually, my experience in the room, watching the audiences and in the Q&A we had in London, but also all the feedback that we got back. We got amazing feedback from London as well as Ukraine. Nobody said, "Oh, you've taught me so much," or "I've learned about something that I didn't know about." They all felt transported by it as a theatrical musical experience. So I don't think it felt didactic. I think we managed to create something that was very personal and powerful as a work of art, which to me is a tribute to you all as artists and to the journey that we went on to make that happen.
But it is also a tribute, Josephine, to your, how did you stage it? Because most of people which wrote me privately, or also some, for example, my dear friend and one of the best actor in Ukraine, when he spoke about silence we had in the show, and he wrote later about that it didn't felt that we are a performer on the stage. It felt like so personal and so close, and he told like it felt like we are sitting in living room, and it's a family conversation about something very painful but very important to speak through. And I was thinking about this, that there was no distance between audience and us performer, and I think it's actually because how you suggested that we are in Yuriy's living room, in Yuriy's studio.
Was the way you went about directing it different with each space that you took the show to, Josephine?
Well, we've not really done it in Berlin yet. So it was a sort of theatrical concert when we performed it in Berlin. So we only really have had 2 proper performances. And I think ultimately we created something magical, and with this brilliant team. So the intimacy happened thanks to my brilliant again, wonderful collaboration with Yael, who's the dramaturg who brought in to help tease out the text. And she really spent so long and carefully working with Mariana and Svetlana and Yuriy and I to enable the text that the artist spoke to make sure it was their voices and their language and their way we work with kind of verbatim techniques, so it really became their voices speaking directly to us on stage. So that's partly it. Marie Blank, who did this unbelievable set for us, incorporating design, which enables us to move and for it to feel the same everywhere. And Jess's lighting to enable us to feel that, to playfully explore this idea of being in the same room as each other, and then occasionally with different lighting enable Mariana, Sveta and Yuriy to speak directly to us out of the studio.
It was already going to be quite a difficult day for all 3 of you, but how was the experience of going and visiting the site on the day of the performance? You guys went to Babyn Yar before coming to the theatre.
I'm very careful about going to places like camps and ghettos. The only place I've been to is Theresienstadt, and it was so strong and so overwhelming that I know that I'm being careful with where I go, because I know so much from reading and listening and watching that sometimes being in those places is it's too hard for me. So going to Babyn Yar, I wasn't sure that I have to go. I wasn't sure if I want to go. I was afraid of getting overwhelmed right before we have to play the show, which is already emotionally very hard for me. But my worries weren't right. because when you're there, the devastating and the ugly truth that Soviet Union regime managed to cover this place with concrete and create a park where people are walking their dogs, where you cannot really make the connection between what happened here and the place that your feet are standing on, and where there is no space for silence and just being and remembering. It's a place which made me very sad for different reasons. You know what I mean? This is a place where the memory was killed, manipulated and killed. This is what Mariana is talking about in the show, about manipulating the memory. I'm not sure I am able to find the words to describe this profound sadness I felt there.
I just can add to Sveta that I am so thankful and so happy that in Ukraine is now such an urgency and such that people feel this necessity of taking care of such places in Babyn Yar and in all other places when massacres happened, and that we are really now clearly understanding that we have to do it, and we have to do it now, and also to remember. For me, it's crazy. Suddenly I realized that there is no place to remember Holocaust in Ukraine, and there is no place to remember Holodomor in Ukraine. It's like both things were totally not allowed to even speak about during Soviet time, and both people really stand up now to fight for memory. I don't know how to say it even.
When you say this urgency now and this desire to remember, to fight for memory, where do you think that's come from?
It's probably a very natural process of getting more and more free, more and more independent, to free your soul, to free your identity, and then to understand how dangerous it is to manipulate the memory and to put beton over the memory. To understand how dangerous it is for us, for our children, for our grandchildren, I have heard about park, which is now in the place where Babyn Yar happened. And then when I saw people there making a walk or going with the dog, I felt so angry.
I'm not sure that I personally felt anger, but I have a different relationship with that place than the North or all of my colleagues. But I definitely felt I couldn't feel the memories. I couldn't feel the horror in that place. The trees are all younger than the memory of, than the massacre itself. And they're so tall. They've just, like the place has been, as Svetlana was saying, it's been covered over. And I think to go that morning to the Yar and then to know that we were going to the theatre to spend the next 8 or 9 hours in this incredibly personal, incredibly intimate theatrical, musical experience where we would have this encounter with Rahil, who his family died there, and she tells these stories, and it's personal and moving and emotional and rich and textured and layered, and there's all sorts of emotional. It's like an emotional volcano, and I mean in a good way, that happens in our work, carefully, sensitively, gently, and I think I just felt that it was that personal connection that we had with Rahil and with this story, and you all have with the material in your own ways. We really carefully found ways in to the material for you all. I felt that that's the way to remember, not through great bits of concrete and parks. So I felt really I think going there and not having a person, not feeling anything, made me realize the importance and the power of the work that we were doing to create something that felt more intimate and more personal.
I think now in the 7th year of the war with Russia, which has been very hard and tough, I think that Ukraine understands the importance of owning its history, and because otherwise it will be rewritten for them. And I think this is a late reply to your question, is where this urgency is coming from, to think and to hear about this, some of the darker pages of the country's history.
What are your hopes for Songs for Babyn Yar for the show? Are you hoping that it will be able to do it again in the Ukraine?
It will be great to do it in Ukraine, and it will be great to do it anywhere, actually, because I think London, we're talking about mostly about the Kyiv show, but London show was incredible too. And it felt different, and I'm sure it will feel very different playing it in Germany for obvious reasons. But I'm really looking forward to play it wherever we get a chance to do this, because I'm sure it will be, each time it will be different and it will be painful, and I'm sure, but we'll come out of it stronger. And this is a very mixed experience. It is painful, but I think we were very happy after doing this in the end.
As much as it's important for me to play it in other parts of the world, a big part of me would love to go back to Ukraine and play, and in Kyiv again, because as Mariana mentioned, there weren't many people who could attend the show. I know for sure that some people couldn't get tickets, and I just think that people of Kyiv, they have to see it again. It would be important for them to see it again.
That was one of the feedback and one of requests that we perform it in Ukraine more. I would love to go to Lviv. I would love to go to Khmelnytsky, to Vinnytsia, to Mariupol,
Odessa,
to Mykolaiv, Odessa, all these places where Jewish life was so rich. And I really think that very often, a lot of feedback, people were telling it is healing, it is important, we need it now. I'm so thankful for the whole team that we managed to do something so honest and so not pathetic and with big pathos and with big, because that's also what's happening now with the memorization of Babyn Yar, big, horrible, scandalic thing with a lot of ego and a lot of gigantomania. That's the word? Gigantomania.
Megalomania, I understand.
Megalomania. And it's scary. It's scary because it's not about memory. It's about different thing, I want to perform it everywhere, but most I want to perform in Ukraine.
I agree. I want to perform it everywhere too, and Ukraine again. What I was going to do when I was going to slightly hijack the conversation was to talk about, it's not just about the audience. For you three to be doing it there, for all of the poignancy of performing a show in Kyiv, it was unbelievable. And Sveta, we haven't touched on one of the most powerful moments of the evening was you performing Nechama's song, which you talked about as part of the Q&A, but I don't know if you fancy sharing it with us in English as part of the podcast, how it was to perform the lullaby.
I will say a couple words for our audience about what it is. It's a song which was written by the poet Shikidris and a composer Rivka Bayarska, and it's a lullaby for Babyn Yar. It's crying of a mother who is looking for her dead children and is trying. Since there are no remains of her children, she is trying to put to sleep the entire Babyn Yar with her voice. And she is asking other mothers to join her in her song, in her cry. And this song was performed by my dearest teacher and friend, Nechama Lifshitz, who was a Jewish Yiddish singer from Lithuania and performed all over Soviet Union. And she had this song in her repertoire. But then when she performed it in Kyiv, it felt like it was the first time that somebody at all touched this topic from stage, publicly, officially. And the whole audience after the song, there was no clapping, no applause. the audience just stood up. People stood up and they were silent for a long, long time. And then Nechama had many problems after this concert in her career and personal life. And I don't know if the song was performed in Kyiv after this concert, which I was just telling you about. It might very well be that this was the second time in Kyiv's history that the song written by Ukrainian Jewish authors in Moscow was heard in Kyiv. And I have to say that the song is sung towards the end of our performance. And until then, I was holding in there, but after the song, I lost it. I hope that by our next shows, I will be able not to cry, because this is not something I want to do on stage. I'm not trying to say that it was my failure in any case. No, I cannot judge myself for things I feel on stage in our show. But this was, for me, the moment where I emotionally couldn't control it anymore. And it's good that it happens towards the end of the show, not at the beginning or in the middle. But yeah, it was overwhelming.
You performed with such dignity and care, Sveta, and I was towards the back of the theatre, so I was not aware of the tears, and it may well be that there were some people closer who were aware, but to my eyes, you kept together unbelievably.
Thank you, Josephine.
I think I had a moment of having that moment while you were singing, thinking exactly that thought: has this song been sung here before? Since Nechama sung it and was arrested by the KGB for singing it. Thank you for telling us that, sharing that story with us. It was an honor for us all to be with you as you sung that song.
I actually want to add something, because about thinking where we would like to perform it and what does it mean. While talking that I so much want to perform it in Ukraine, I suddenly realized, it was yesterday, the attack in US and synagogue, and it was few months ago, and Yom Kippur, a synagogue in Germany was in danger, and then I felt like, I know we can do so little, and I know our performance is not like huge, show, but I really feel if we can do something to have our silent cry and to try to shake people and stop rising up anti-Semitism, it will be why we have to continue to do it.
It's amazing you say that, Mariana, because I'm sure we all remember that session we had right at the beginning in December 2020, when we had the conversation where you said, I'm sure it was you said, why, we sure we want to do this. And Sveta said to you, but if we change one person's opinion, then it's worth it. Do you remember saying that, Sveta?
Yes, really, thank you for remembering. Yeah.
To have that reflected back to us from you, Mariana, is amazing, because I think we have the potential to do that. And I imagine then that you feel that you've seen that through the work that we've done, that we do have that potential to make a little change. Someone said to me, another brick out of the wall. We can just, they put two in, we can take one out.
And who knows who this person is going to be? Maybe it's the new Messiah who is going to change the world.
Probably.
Despite of that, we didn't know each other really before this work, and we felt so close and we felt so much in love with each other. And so it will be so fun to continue.
I watched this presentation of a recent book of of Ukrainian historian Yaroslav Ritsak some days ago, and he started with this amazing thought that no matter what times, what events a historian is writing about, he's writing about his or her times, or the current times. And I think what we did is something that it's as much about the past as it's about the present.
Здається, падав сніг. Здається, було свято. Розквітли квіти.
I want to thank Mariana, Sveta, Yuriy, and of course our artistic director Josephine for their time and their eloquent, beautiful reflections. Many more dates are in the works for Songs for Babyn Yar, so sign up to the Dash newsletter for updates on where you'll be able to see it next. The Dash Arts podcast will return in a few weeks with our next series on protest songs with more amazing artists and speakers. And to play us out today, the beautiful and heartbreaking lullaby Sveta mentioned earlier in the podcast. I'm Rachel Head. Thank you for listening.
Mein Jüngele, mein Janko. Is die Stuben trunnen mitten Flammenfeuer, wie soll ich heuten, mein Jüngele, mein Teier? Ah, 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 ah.